to Mass Liberation's D8 forum. Quick, just quick housekeeping. Um, we got food, so make sure y'all eat. Y'all get a plate, go get another plate. Get another plate, go get another plate.
What?
Y'all eat all the food. But make sure y'all grab y'all some food. Please know that in the back, in the right corner, we have our South Phoenix displacement report. Please go engage and go over there and get that info and get a good understanding of some of the work that went into going to put that together as a whole. We also have our D8 platform that's back there that talks about what the platform is for mass liberation, right? And for directly impacted communities, for our South Phoenix community that isn't your normal, bullshit, right? So make sure y'all go ahead, engage. We're going to show a clip. We're going to show a clip from an amazing documentary series called the 1619 Project. 1619 Project is a 6-part documentary series on Hulu that examines the legacy of slavery in America and explores how it has shaped nearly all aspects of our society today, from policing to music to capitalism, and even the principles of our democracy itself. So without further ado, I'm gonna play that clip for y'all.
Black people, and it has become a type of
and established democracy. And amid the ruin and devastation of this nation's deadliest war, in an era known as Reconstruction, this country finally began to try to redeem the grave sin of slavery. These newly emancipated people pushed lawmakers to pass the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, abolishing slavery, guaranteeing equal protection under the law, and citizenship not just for Black people, but for any person born on American soil, and making it illegal to deny voting rights based on race. In this moment of rebirth, Black Americans embrace democracy and its promises of equality with the type of fervor that comes from living so long with no freedom at all.
What they want after slavery is over is justice, and they go about building it. They knew that if Black people enjoyed all of these rights, privileges, and protections, then all Americans would be able to enjoy them. And that's the beauty of who they were as a people.
We know how the story of Reconstruction ends. A deal was struck that if Rutherford B. Hayes can get the presidency, then he will agree to withdraw the federal troops from the South. And in doing so, he leaves these newly freed people to the mercy of their former enslavers. Can you talk about what happens in that period when Reconstruction ends?
And so what we see over the next 25 years is whites in the South constructing a new order, and this new order will be what we call Jim Crow. But they can't construct it until they disfranchise Black men, which is what they spend the next decade trying to do.
White men in power passed new allegedly race-neutral laws to get around the 15th Amendment. Grandfather clauses said you could only vote if your grandfather had, but most Black men's grandfathers had been enslaved. Slavery had ensured most Black people and their freedom illiterate and impoverished, so white officials instituted literacy tests and poll taxes to vote.
As I stated before, this is the Mass Liberation DA Forum. We're Mass Liberation Arizona, a Black directly impacted led organization that centers and follows the leadership of those directly impacted. We are here to continue the legacy of people who came before us, fighting for justice and doing the work of repairing the legacy of trauma and violence. I'm from St. Louis, but y'all stuck with me here in Arizona, man. But where I'm from, if you want to motivate somebody to do something, who knew they could do it, but there was something holding them back, you dared them to do it. When you dared them, it gave them a sense of pride and confidence, as if you didn't believe that they could accomplish the dare, so they were going to show you that they could do this achievable no matter what the feat was. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. Tonight I'm going to dare you to do something that we fail to do so often because of how we've been beaten down by a system not built for us. By policies put in place to continue the centuries of oppression passed down through generations. I'm going to dare us to do something that we won't do because of the negativities others bestow upon us, so we just don't do it. What is that? What am I going to dare us to do? Y'all ready? Yeah. I need everybody to close their eyes. Take a deep breath. Exhale. Now open your eyes. I'm going to dare you to dream. I'm going to dare you to dream of a world where we don't have to operate within these systems that have killed and caged us. I'm going to dare you to dream of a community where freedom and Black liberation isn't a figment of our imagination or a failed promise from a system built on white supremacy. I'm going to dare you to dream of a community where we address harm with care and not cops. Where we invest in community and not legalize slavery in this carceral system. I'm going to dare you to dream of a world where the infant mortality rate in our Black community is not 3 to 4 times that of our white counterparts, and that there is adequate health care for physical and mental health in our communities. I'm going to dare you to dream of a platform that will truly shift power back into our communities and away from those who abuse it each and every day. I'm going to dare you to dream of a world where our unhoused receive the community care and the resources to feel and be made whole. I'm going to dare you to dream of reparations as an actual attainable demand and not some far-fetched idea. I dare us to dream of a community where we aren't displaced, where gentrification is no more, and where community benefits agreements are as regular and consistent as the system's use of the word stakeholders, and diversity, and inclusion. I dare you to dream of a community where those who are directly impacted are the leaders, the change agents, the voices, the problem solvers, and the healers. Because we know those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And now I'm going to pass it over to some more illustrious human beings to bring forth our land and knowledge.
Looks like we're loud enough for my illustrious self. Good evening, y'all. My name is Ebony Johnson. I am Director of Organizational Growth and Grants Management with Mass Liberation Arizona. Pronouns she, her, and I'm very excited to be sharing a space with you all. For our land acknowledgement, we always like to start our meetings with a land acknowledgement. It's important we do so because we are acknowledging the truth that the land we live on today was taken from its original stewards by the same people that made laws stating Black people were not even human. So thank you for being here with Mass Liberation today and taking time to recognize the land we are on is the unceded and unsurrendered traditional homelands of the Alton, Peepash, Yavapai, and all the descendants of the Hukuko people. We recognize these ancestors and the need to invest in their present day and future descendants. Acknowledgement alone does not change things. We have to address and engage in Indigenous land restoration and Black reparations to begin to correct the violent beginnings of this country. Let us all pause for a moment and take a breath together. Next, I have Matt.
Thank you. Welcome. I didn't know we were going to go to I am Matt Aguilar. I am a third generation Southsider, meaning was born into the South Side.
Southside?
Thank you.
Two S's.
I wanted to talk a little bit about place. Where we are right now, South Phoenix, many of us know the history of segregation, resegregation, patterns of displacement that have led to things, environmental injustices, lack of housing, over-criminalization, over-policing, and many other things listed in the displacement report. Please check that out. But place, today we're at the Neighborhood House. This is owned by Roosevelt School District. Between Southern and Old Southern, many of these houses have historic designations. My family actually owned a home on this block briefly. I grew up in the neighborhood, and we were able to purchase a home here at one point. So my roots are very strong in this specific place. I went to school in South Mountain before I was expelled. Had a lot of seminal firsts in the neighborhood. Some are great. My mom was married in the neighborhood. She was also divorced in the same neighborhood. I went to school here. I was also expelled from school here. But I was also brutalized by police for the first time ever when I was 15 in this neighborhood because I didn't look like I belonged on this side. We also lost that house in the early 2000s, like many did, and have been displaced from this area and have been trying to move back to the specific area where our family is and where our ties are, because this is where I grew up and where I feel most at home. So, wanted to mention a historic designation because we also have a Politics of Place event on Saturday. Please register for that. It's going to be over at the Sotelo Cemetery, where we'll be talking about the same patterns of displacement as well. Before we get into the forum, we want to talk about our forum flow. So to do that, me and Ebony are going to talk about how it's going to work before we introduce our candidate for the evening.
All right, so I want to direct you to the two handouts you should have received on the way in. One would be our Master Values. You got to hold it up, let me see it. I want to see it. All right. These values have been earned with our people and our partners over the past 3 years. They express what we fundamentally believe as abolitionists and guide our work in the community and what we advocate for when engaging political power by the City Council. The other handout should be our platform for Care Not for Cops. We got it, should be yellow. I see a lot of yellow. Raise it up if you got it. Awesome. This platform is our values in action and an expression of solidarity with the partner organizations that helped identify these demands. Civil Pathway Collective, Fund for Empowerment, BPOT, and Unemployed Workers United.
Okay, y'all are all right, or cool, I'm gonna stay seated. So today's forum, will be structured, we'll have the first round of questions will be values-based questions. We have 3 questions where the candidates will have 2 minutes each to answer. Our second round will be policy-based questions. And our third round will be courtesy of everybody here, our audience. Please make sure you fill out a question card and make sure you turn them into one of the volunteers collecting. If you're a volunteer collecting, can you raise a hand or scream? Okay, so there's one person raising a hand. So Vanessa and Bruce for sure, give your cards to them. We'll try to answer as many as possible. We won't be able to get to all questions, but we'll try to get to as many as possible by grouping similar or repeating questions. We'll filter out questions that are either, way off topic or not values aligned. So just want to reiterate, we'll try to get to everybody's questions, but not all questions will be read. And once again, candidates will have 2 minutes to answer.
which will be signaled by Helen, another Southsider, and Matt's the squad member. She will raise that card that says 30 seconds left, when they have 30 seconds left, and then time's up. Also, if when answering, if our candidates get a little lost on the way to finding their answer, I and we as moderators will happily guide you back to the question that has been asked. Now, as you can see, only one of the two candidates is here tonight, so we'll be exclusively hearing from Carlos Garcia, the D8 incumbent. We're going to go ahead and allow Carlos, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. In a moment, even though Keisha did not choose to attend this evening, her seat will remain open. We have posted our social media handles here for you in case you'd like to ask her any questions tonight.
Awesome.
Are we putting those up somewhere?
I got a message.
We'll figure that out. We'll also be live tweeting with questions from tonight's forum and tagging Keisha because we feel that our community deserves answers for her if she wants to run for office. So I'd like to welcome Carlos. Carlos, go ahead and take 1 minute to introduce yourself to the community.
Thank you all. Thank you. Is that good? Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you, Master, for putting this together. Appreciate the intentionality of the space, children here, the food, and the organization. We had a debate last night hosted by a large publication. This definitely blows them out of the water. As a public, to learn a few things from tonight. I've been the council member for 3.5 years. I live on 16th Street in Southern with my partner Alexis, my son Chimad, who's 16, and my daughter Yaretsi, who's 6 years old. I'm actually originally from Mexico. I spent in the council. I grew up in this state undocumented and was fortunate enough to gain my documents as a teenager. And so the majority of my adult life I spent organizing and working, mostly in immigrant rights, but also in criminal justice work. And so I come from that world into the arena of politics 3.5 years ago with the intention to shift things up a little. For some, it's too much, like folks that are supporting my opponent, whether it's the realtors, the police unions, or the Chamber of Commerce, or even the last 3 mayors who are supporting there. And for others, I also acknowledge it hasn't been enough, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And so I also want to acknowledge that this has been a lot of learning. 6 months into office, the pandemic hit, and so a lot of the things that we came in thinking we were going to do, there's still work to be done. So my time's up on that, but that's a little bit of who I am.
Thank you. And Carlos is absolutely right. He did go to last night's debate, and we are blowing it out of the water. So thank you for acknowledging that.
We're about to enter a conversation about values. We shared our massive AZ values with the room just a few moments ago. Now we're going to ask the candidates about their values and what guides their decision making in their work. Ms. Raza?
Ms. Raza. Coming to the podium is our friend, Ms. Rosalind, to help guide us on justice reinvestment. Give them a round of applause.
I first want to begin by saying I am so delighted to see the faces in the room, and this makes such an impact. I want to applaud each of you while you applaud whoever you were clapping for previously. But give yourself a hand clap because you showed up for a very meaningful conversation. Good job. So the value that we lift up and the value that I will talk about tonight is justice reinvestment. And And the money that's currently being spent to criminalize and cage people could be used for what?
A lot
It
of
could be
stuff.
going toward the resources. Yes, yes. It should go into strengthening our communities. And currently, the city spends nearly half of their budget on the police department that has been labeled by the national news as one of the most deadliest police forces in the nation. It is also under investigation by the DOJ for its violence. And Phoenix PD being under investigation, that should be a heads up for us. We need to keep our eyes on that, pay attention. But justice reinvestment is simply redirecting our public funds and our resources for the community needs. And we get to know the community needs by being in relationship, by listening and centering people in the community that are most challenged by needs that go unaddressed. And we understand those needs simply by being in relationship. And that's why I'm excited about you being in the room. That part of the community is asking for things like housing, not just housing, but affordable, accessible housing. That's what they're asking for.
Get it right, low income.
Yes, yes, yes. In the very communities that we live and grew up in. And so affordable and accessible health resources and culturally relevant services. And that's what we mean by justice reinvestment. Let's get it.
So Carlos, our question to you is, please share any values that will guide your approach in investing public dollars and resources.
So thank you. All that was said, it hits home with me. I agree with what was said. I think this conversation has been oversimplified by the pre-fund conversation in the sense of, they've been able to villainize that conversation or that term. But I think how it was just explained is exactly what the meaning of the value that I hold, right? What are the things at the root that need to happen? And also what are the negative things that made it to where we got to the place of declaring war or using enforcement and policing to solve every societal issue. And so I think it's flipping that on its head and figuring out what are the things that folks need, right? Whether it's housing, substance abuse support, or so on. Those are the things that should be that we should be looking to invest in. The other thing I want to mark is that the budget that currently funds police at more than 50% of our budget is a budget that's never been evaluated or reevaluated. An assessment is not made. It's almost like it was written as a constitution a long time ago, where no one's actually looking back at what the needs are and how we adjust to that. And I think that's the conversation we need to have in the sense of what are we, every year we get a budget, and instead of actually evaluating what the current community needs are, we actually just add on or try to shift a little bit from a budget that was created by people that did not include the people in the street.
Thank you. Now up next we have Omar, who's going to talk about our abolitionist value. We center directly impacted leadership. Give it up for Omar, everybody.
Excuse my voice, I'm getting over whatever I'm getting over. My name is Omar Thomas. I'm a directly impacted Black Liberation Center organizer, community organizer in Massillon, Arizona. I'm personally involved because my life story is not ordinary. I just gained emancipation approximately 6 months and 1 day ago. As a result of the work that Mass Liberation did in collaboration with others. I served 34 years, 8 months, and a few days for a crime with no victims. And I'm not happy about it, but I feel the best path forward is through the fellowship that I'm involved with right now in Mass Liberation and doing everything I can to speak on behalf of other directly impacted individuals. So this is personal, and I'm passionate about it. The people closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, but furthest from the resources. City District 8 is a district that knows this struggle well, very well. I spent a lot of time on the south side of Phoenix. I know the struggle well before I knew that it was the struggle. While other city districts are thriving, residents are being displaced from communities. They have higher rates of infant mortality in our communities. People in South Phoenix are dying earlier than everybody else. And these problems are permeating throughout the community, specifically impacting people of color. And it's not a secret. We need more than token representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. For you, Carlos, the question is, we know part of the duty of your office is to appoint people to boards and commissions. These positions make recommendations and decisions around issues like housing, health, food in your district. What values do you center when deciding who to appoint and what policies to prioritize at the city level?
Thank you. Thank you, Omar. Congratulations on everyone. It's great to have you here. There's two things. One, there's existing systems that were created when there's commissions and boards that exist. And so that's one area where we're going to appoint. I think the values that there are similar in the sense of people that are mostly impacted, whether it's regionally or close, depending on the issue. For example, we started one commission, the Old Barrios, what they call now the Land Reuse Area, which is if you ever go on the east side of the airport, you see a bunch of gravel lots. That area used to be the Ripas, it used to be the Old Barrios, and they got taken out. We made sure that there's folks that are originally from that area that were involved in what that's going to look like moving forward. But we've also worked, and so that's something new that we put out there. We're also now happy to develop a public health office that's going to have a board that's going to accompany it of community folks that are going to guide where that's going. Similar with the new community assistance program, which is the
Question about that. So you mentioned picking folks to guide that. How do you, what are the values that you center when you're picking those folks?
So in that sense, so in that particular board that I spoke of, it's folks that live in the area, that know the area, that have experienced the trauma of being displaced for the last 30 years at the airport, have pushed those folks out. And so in that situation, that's there. I think one of the hardest things as I came into council and when we make these decisions is trying to figure out, to finish this thought, trying to figure out the balance between the folks that are in the area, meeting them where they're at politically, or in their understanding of what the situations are, and trying to figure out if there's a role, or if the office has a role in also bringing information, or I want to say politicize, or bringing education to the folks that are running this board.
All right, and up next, we'll have Ms. Roslyn come and center our Appalachian's value of people over property.
This just keeps getting better and better. We get to learn what the values are, we get to know what people are doing, and we get to hear from our candidate that can respond. I'm excited about what's rumbling in the room. And so the value I'm talking about is people over property. And when people are displaced by incarceration, their natural relationships, and boy, can we talk about that, their natural relationships to place and people are stripped away. They are locked away behind barriers in the form of cages so they can be easily surveilled. They can be easily surveilled and exploited for their labor. This is a process we see mirrored with land. When land is stripped away of its natural relationships to place and people, land is locked behind barriers of property lines and gated walls so that land becomes easily surveilled and exploited for property value. The result is a growing number of our community. It renders us unable to access healthy food, stable housing, safe and affordable health care. And so when we think about land use and development, we center the value of people over property, where we recognize that human life is always, always, always more important than profit and property.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. And yes, when we do think about the development in South Phoenix, we do see a lot of development on once vacant lots or lots where there's different types of buildings. And we can imagine a lot of things in those lots. We want to ask Carlos, when creating priorities for land use and development, what are your values and how do those propel you forward?
So I think it differs in different parts of the district. One of the projects we've been working on right now is 24 Shin Bronco. So break the market and what happened there. So what happened there is in the 90s, there was conditions there where there was things that folks didn't want. And so that area got villainized to a point, and the community themselves asked for condemnation of the area. But in order to condemn that property, there was a vilification of the area that was so much that when they tore down that property, it's still sitting empty almost 35 years later after it's been knocked down. And so I think it's understanding that the value would be understanding what happened and how it could have been, like what was missing from that, and now as we respond, or the responsibility to make sure that we're not only redeveloping the area, but making sure we're mending the damage that was done by what was, by that area being condemned and taken out. And so as we've done a 2-year process in community meetings to figure out what's going to happen there, folks have asked for certain things. I think the value is not only, having folks have input of what's going to be there, but definitely going back and making sure you're mending the damage that was done before that.
So what I'm hearing is like land restoration.
Yes, and then specifically when it's city-owned property, there's the ability, and we should have the responsibility as council members and the city, is that's when you actually have more agency to allow community to determine what happens in those properties. And so majority of the city-owned property that's out there right now, what we've done is move forward to create affordable housing in those properties. And I think that's something that I didn't know before I got on council, and many folks don't know, that if it is a city-owned property, we actually have more agency and the ability to demand what happens in that lot.
Thank you, and we're so glad you said that because we will get back to that later, of course. If you are abiding with these values, I don't think I wrote probably in here. Then we gotta fix that. There's important conversations for D8 residents coming up this Saturday, the 25th. I mentioned it earlier. Sorry, I'm speaking a little fast. We are going to talk more about displacement and I don't know why it says and then we're also going to continue to ask Keisha the questions on Twitter since she's not here tonight, which they are going to have a chance to respond to the questions. We would love to have them here. But yeah, please join us Saturday for the very important conversation at Campo Santo Mexicano, the Sotelo Cemetery, over near 12th Street and Broadway, near a plot of land that is tended to by our friends at Siwa Poly Collective, who are here in the room. Thank you for being here. Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and move forward. So we're about to enter a conversation about our policy platform and to hear the candidates' own platform and policy ideas. First, we will open with a short clip from a 1619 project to get us grounded.
Head to the Union Army. Mustafa fought for the Union Army for nearly 3 years, and in January 1865, as the Civil War raged to its final battle, General William T. Sherman attended a meeting with a delegation of Black leaders, and he asked them, "What do you want for your own people?" Reverend Garrison Frazier, the group's leader, made it clear. The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land to turn and till by our own labor. 4 days later, Sherman issued a Special Field Order 15, calling for the federal government to seize as much as 400,000 acres from the Confederacy and split it among the thousands of newly emancipated people. That order would become known as 40 Acres and a Mule. And to this day, it is the only real effort this nation ever made to compensate Black Americans for 250 years of chattel slavery. But that effort didn't even last a year. Just months after Sherman's order, Lincoln was assassinated. His successor, Andrew Johnson, a former slave owner and known white supremacist, rescinded the order and returned the confiscated land to the same white men who had fought against the Union. And yet, at the same time the federal government failed to make good on its 40-acre promise to Black Americans, it began providing 160-acre land grants to white Americans and Europeans enticed to immigrate to the country. The policy was known as the Homestead Act, and from 1868 to 1934, 246 million acres, nearly 10% of the nation's land, much of which was stolen from indigenous people, was given to white families. It is estimated that there are more than 46 million white Americans, a quarter of the U.S. population, who are still the beneficiaries of the Homestead Act. These patterns of explicit government policy that helped white people and largely excluded the formerly enslaved and their descendants would be repeated over the next 100 years. When the federal government stripped the free people of their land, many were forced, once again, to work for white people on plantations.
Second part is flipping.
Then is going to scroll to the second part of this.
Homes. In an effort to revive the spiraling economy, President Franklin D. Roosevelt enacted the New Deal in 1933.
You saw an expansion of government like we've never seen before. Many of the programs that we know to be entitlements today were established during the New Deal. We were subsidizing farmers. Social Security was established. Unemployment insurance was established. There was a swelling of government interventions that actually had a significant impact, a positive impact on the economy. Now, that sounds great, but Black people were largely shut out of the New Deal.
In a compromise with white Southerners, Roosevelt agreed to exclude farm workers and domestics out of critical social safety net programs like Social Security and unemployment insurance. That exclusion left out 60% of all Black workers.
Basic problems, unemployment, the right to organize, were still unsettled.
The New Deal also empowered American labor unions. The Wagner Act ensured workers the right to organize and strike, and as a result, working conditions improved and wages increased. But those unions often barred Black workers from joining, keeping Black Americans from many of the benefits white Americans had gained.
You know, in many ways, the New Deal represented the first affirmative action policy for white people. That it said, hey, when you're suffering, we're going to not only remedy that, we're going to provide security for you and your family for the future. Now, a significant portion of that where it really showed up in the New Deal was housing policy.
The Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency founded under the New Deal, adopted segregated housing policies from local municipalities and created a national system that used color-coded maps to tell banks which loans it would insure. The federal government marked the most desirable areas for lending in green. Blue stood for still desirable, yellow indicated areas that were declining, and a bright red marked anywhere Black Americans lived or even lived nearby as too hazardous to lend to. This practice, created by the federal government and adopted by lenders as well as cities, was called redlining. The federal government created these maps in 239 cities across the country.
Redlining was not an evaluation tool based upon the quality of the housing. It was based upon the share of Black people in the neighborhood. So there were roadblocks at every step of the way preventing Black people from gaining wealth and opportunity, and more importantly, from gaining power.
98% of the loans the Federal Housing Administration insured from 1934 to 1962 went to white Americans, excluding nearly all Black Americans out of the government program credited with building the modern American middle class. 43% of my hometown's redlined. And when my grandmother arrived to Waterloo from Mississippi, she moved into the segregated east side of the city and took the jobs that were most available to Black women. Whether they lived in the north or the south, she cleaned. One of the things that
As a quick reminder, if you have question cards filled out, please turn them into our volunteers. On the topic of ending housing violence, we know that housing violence is a systemic and structural way that eviction, exclusion, and enforcement is used to control, remove, and transform places. Whether it be discrete or public violence, property owners, eviction enforcement agencies, and developers use their power to determine worthiness and exclusion from land. This housing violence is what fuels the displacement both directly and indirectly from rent increases, limited affordable housing choices, and drastic shifts in community services and support systems. Residents in South Phoenix are being forced out of their communities through a combination of discriminatory zoning practices, criminalization, and environmental injustices. The targeted practice of pushing out Black and brown people from their own communities forms the foundation of segregation that continues to plague the city of Phoenix. Recognizing the harmful systems of power between the city, developers, financial institutions, and landlords, there is an urgent need to disrupt future practices of housing violence. So our question for this evening is, what is your policy, platform, or ideas to end housing violence in District 8? Also, how will you center Black and brown communities in District 8 in policy and in practice as we face a future of mass development and displacement?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to start off with something that's happening next week, because I don't want to forget. One organization hosting tonight, Google, has led great work to do an anti-discrimination ordinance, forced us to put it on the next week's agenda. So there'll be a vote next week to end income source discrimination, meaning if someone got a voucher, if someone has the ability to try to get a home, that regardless of where their income source comes, that they won't be discriminated on. It's a little ridiculous that we have to do this, that these laws still exist, but that's one thing we want to make sure happens in the next week or so. So hopefully you all can join and push for that. One thing I mentioned earlier, the city-owned land needs to be turned around and either make affordable housing or make accessible to folks. We shouldn't be handing it over to development that's not benefiting people. I think having a different relationship with the state at this point is going to allow us to bring more resources, allow us to take more risk. A lot of what kept the city from doing things like pushing back at this income source discrimination was the fear that the state was preempt or take away our funding if we did something that they didn't agree with. With the new Attorney General, that's not the situation we're in. And so, I don't have all the ideas, but we actually have an opportunity now to come together and actually bring more policies like this forward now that we're able and don't have the fear of the state coming down and taking our money.
Thank you. Shout out to Ulu. They're in the building. With them next Wednesday, March 1st. Please join us. Amazing work from Ulu. Sorry.
Excited about Ulu, okay. Moving on to reproductive justice. The Black infant mortality rate is 2.5 times higher than their white counterparts in places like South Phoenix, yet access to relevant healthcare continues to be a problem. In addition, BIPOC communities in Arizona currently face higher rates of severe maternal morbidity by 1.5 to 3.5 times higher than white communities. Severe maternal morbidity has been associated with a 57% increased likeliness of having a PTSD diagnosis. Community-based doula support in the birth space has been reported to significantly reduce cesarean births and instrumental vaginal births that need for oxytocin augmentation and shorten the duration of labor. Birth workers continue to advocate for recognition of their work and resources like a Black Indigenous Birth Center in South Phoenix. Our question for you this evening is, what is your policy platform or idea for expanding access to health resources for pregnant people and supporting Black, Indigenous, POC, and intersecting immigrant birth workers and in District 8?
So, first of all, I think the fall of Roe v. Wade gave two opportunities. One, I think it forced all of us to have more communication and figure out, what resources were out there in the case of the situation or folks being criminalized at a different level. So what we did was right away come together with different birth workers and folks to try to figure out what the solutions or what they needed to stand in the city to be. But it also did something similar to what the pandemic did, is it highlighted the already lack of resources. Like there's no health clinics in South Phoenix that deal with this, even though we have the highest rates of infant mortality, specifically with Black women and brown folks. And so I think it's two things. One is our role in bringing resources and making sure that folks are tended to, but also what we moved on this year is creating a public health office. Now this public health office, unlike the state or the county's public health office, is not to serve as a service provider themselves, but actually as a resource to be able to create coalition, to be able to bring resources together. And I think this is definitely one of the issues that our office is going to make sure to push. And then obviously continue to work along folks like obviously COPA people like who's here today in their push for their Ubuntu work that they've been doing in the space that they wish to create, supporting folks like that, and continuing to listen to the most impacted, well, not the most impacted folks, but to the organizations in the network.
Thank you, Carlos.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, tonight it's called our Care Not Cops platform. So Phoenix's police budget, we talked about it a little bit, during the fiscal year of 2020 was the 5th largest in the U.S. 40% of the city's funds were funneled into the police department instead of investing in desperately needed community resources. The job of police is not to provide solutions when harm happens or to stop harm from happening. On the contrary, the job of police is to criminalize behaviors. And we see that in ways where the unsheltered folks are criminalized, residents who are in need of medical or mental health care often end up harmed or even murdered by police. Black and brown communities, young folks especially, constantly under the threat and surveillance of police, which, when we think about giving away so much of our public dollars, and we look at where we live and what communities are designated as safe, the safest communities do not have the most cops, they have the most resources. And the Phoenix Police Department continues to be one of the deadliest and most violent police agencies in the country. Yet Phoenix City Council refuses to invest funds that would normally go into policing into healthier and safer resources. True solutions for our community. Earlier you mentioned root causes. 51st Avenue Baseline, for example, is an area with many residents facing violent tactics aimed to displace them from the area in which they live. All the while, the city has no guaranteed housing. We have a severe lack of re-entry and transitional housing options, much less re-entry and transitional housing that has voluntary programs and treatment. And all of these same folks are just churned back into that cycle of criminalization without being provided the necessary care from the city. So our question to you is, what is your commitment to reinvest those public dollars into community care, mutual aid, and health resources that address root causes, instead of funneling one more dollar of our money into a department with a bloated budget and a duty to criminalize community members?
Good question. I mentioned the pandemic earlier. I think the pandemic relief funds that came in gave us an opportunity to try things that we would have never tried. And so when it comes to unsheltered folks, we were able to open a new shelter. In the 90s, when they opened the big shelter, the cash shelter, they were supposed to open 6 other shelters, and the second shelter never came. And so we had the opportunity with those funds to open a new shelter on 28th Street in Washington that allowed folks to stay there 24 hours a day, that allows them to have the services there and be taken care of in a different way. We had, either unsheltered folks or formerly unsheltered folks visit the location and talk about the needs. In a similar way, we were able to get $8 million for the first time ever. The city of Phoenix invested money in mental health. $8 million was given to Mercy Care, an organization that then used it in other ways to work in other partnerships to get that money out. And so I feel like those funds allowed us to be able to imagine a place where we could spend that type of money and then be able to see the results. And so I think what's important now is to be able to get the results from those projects that happen and be able to come back and make the argument. And the argument is not only how successful they are, but also how it actually reduced the need for more enforcement, right? I think that's where the trap of the defund conversation comes, because it always comes, you're never able to create these things that we're talking about, to work on the root causes without, because we have a set budget, or you only have so much of a time to use. In this opportunity in the last 2 years, we were actually able to do expenditures we would never do with an ordinary budget. Now the next work, and where, again, I don't get to make all the decisions on my own. Yeah. Just to finalize, I think the work is to make sure that the rest of the council prioritizes the things we saw and how that money is spent.
Thank you for that. Okay, that is it for our values and platform questions that we had planned for this evening. Next up, we will be turning to community questions with Bruce, St. Louis Superman. This is last call for questions. St. Louis Superman. Oops, super nasty. Last call for questions. As a friendly reminder, pass those in, and Bruce is going to start to read those. I'll reiterate, we will not be able to read all questions. We're going to try. We do have a little bit of extra time. As you notice, there's an empty seat over here. So we will try and answer as many as possible. We'll group similar questions together. We'll filter out questions that are way off topic or not values aligned. And when we say that, we mean this is a Care Not Cops platform. We're here to center community. We talked about last night's debate. One thing that I took issue with, as far as moderation, you know, we're doing great. But the way that folks were talking about communities in DA, how certain members are burdens to others. That is not something we do here. It is all of us and none of us. We center direct impact leadership. So I just wanted to point that out when we say like things that are not valuable. So you're writing something angry and violent. We're not going to, you know. But cool. Candidates, we still have 2 minutes. Helen will be doing keeping time. And the same thing will guide you if things are confusing. So we'll get into it. Bruce, whenever you're ready.
All right, just a quick reiteration. There were a lot of questions that were kind of similar. So certain parts I kind of took out and combined with other ones. So if you hear a piece of your question, just know it goes with a piece of something else. All right, don't get mad at me. I promise. We're gonna get to it. I promise. But the first question we'll ask is pretty simple, right? What do you have in mind to improve the community? But the key word of this question is true, right? Because we know all too often we hear buzz phrases, we hear, you know, what they want to give us, but don't end up doing it. So what do you have in mind to improve the community truly, and what will you, and will you be available if anyone reaches out for help, as well as to give you ideas to improve their community? Because as we know, those closest to the problem are closest to the solution.
Yeah. So yes, definitely be available. I see Dana Virgil here shaking her head, and I want to point out because sometimes it doesn't have to be the council office, or it doesn't have to be me. Dana, another community member, joined the Gold Bond Committee this year, and I think sometimes as a council office, what you need to do is make sure that the right people are in the right places. And I wanted to shout out Dana because Dana was able to secure a whole community center for Esteban Park. And those were from a $500 million bond that's going to be presented next year to be voted on, $180 million are going to come to South Phoenix. So I give that as one example. I think there is spaces, you know, where we don't have plug and conflicts, right? Like there's not like a place, but I do think we serve as a connector. So sometimes we are able, you know, to meet someone that's wanting to help or provide a certain service, and then if someone has a need, we can play a matchmaker. In that sense, because the bureaucracy of the city moves too slow when there's emergencies. And so definitely do that. And the last thing I will say is willing to share the things that I get to see now that I didn't know before I got on there. And I think some folks may see that as valuable, some folks may not. But I think definitely the assessment of who pushes what buttons and what resources are there, I've had the privilege of now knowing that in a different way. And so I think the continued commitment to both have an open door to have those conversations, but also share knowledge that I may be gaining by having this position.
Okay.
Real quick, I know last time I mentioned Esteban Park as well, because it used to be like a dumping ground, and you got that cleaned up. I wanted to mention the area just south of Esteban Park. We see a lot of new development. We see a lot of homes being purchased up near the 34th Street area next to the trailer parks. And a lot of folks that have grown up in those neighborhoods generationally are seeing essentially what we're seeing everywhere else, like heightened, not being able to purchase next to where their mom lives. Seeing parcels being bought up, 4 or 5 at a time, and then split and then resold. So people are having to leave the area. How do you plan on engaging folks continuously throughout the process as we're doing things that will improve upon the parks, but of course that will attract people with capital that can easily buy up properties for income or for whatever. How do we continue to maintain that engagement so it's not just at the beginning and then again?
I think similar to when we see what's coming with the library, mostly in District 7, but there was a TOP plan, there's certain work that folks have done to try to prevent gentrification or to try to make sure that improvements are happening for the people that are there. And I think the way we do that is either having city funds, putting our skin in the game, that we assure that those either properties or things remain affordable, or because again, it's not the city that's always going to solve these problems. I know people in this room know that 100%. And so then how do we play?
Does everybody know that in this room, the city's not going to solve all their problems? Yeah, you know that.
So what is our goal to create spaces or community development to be able to acquire, to be able to maintain those places? Or sometimes, what is our role to get out of the way? Right? Like how do we get out of the way and make sure that that happens? So that's not also the only solution is city buying properties and determining what happens, but also creating space and access to resources so folks who do this.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, the City of Phoenix has allowed the neglect of city-owned properties and facilities. They're using the general obligation bond program to refurbish and repair using largely white and brown labor. Please address the lack of accountability and anti-blackness.
So, yes, city properties, especially in parks and other places, have been completely defunded. People are scared to use that word, but that word's been used for every other thing that the city has except the police department. We have community centers that have been sitting vacant. For example, Barrios Unidos has an industrial kitchen that's been sitting there for 12 years. And it's literally just sitting there, almost boarded up. Could be housing, could be community space, could be all those things. And so some spaces have been not handed out, but in agreement with nonprofits to run certain of those spaces. And so that's one thing, yes, acknowledging that those spaces have been funded and some of those buildings, like the building where we now have a shelter sat empty, it was a former B&B, it's a huge building with air conditioner that could have been a shelter 7 years ago when we acquired the property, but it just sat there, and now we turned it into that. Now when it comes to how do we show up for folks, that's a bigger conversation. One of the ways to speak to labor is we attempted to have a prevailing wage measure this year. So anything that has to do with the city contract has to pay a prevailing wage. It unfortunately failed. Only 4 of us on the council voted for that measure. That doesn't address only the anti-blackness, because there's still more in that conversation. But I think being able to pay better, being able to make sure that we're taking care of people that are working on city property is something we have to do.
Okay. How will you oppose gentrification to give those who have been affected by it the chance to live equally to those who've colonized our neighborhood.
Yeah, it's one of those things, there's always so much the city can do, but there is a lot that we can do. The Realtors Association, just because we've had conversations about ending discriminatory policies, or even thinking about having questions about where rent is at, has invested a lot of money against me. One of the things that's happening, it's happening everywhere, but in the zip code we're sitting in now, the zip code I live in, 85042, 60% of rental properties are actually owned by corporations. So it's not like how people think of rental properties in the past, where, you know, someone inherited a piece of land, or someone, you know, has some money and bought another property and then they're leasing that out. It's actually corporations and investment firms that own the majority of rental properties. And so they're able to do two things. One, they control the market, they control whether they rent them or not, and they control the price in which that's put out in the world. And so I do think we need to seriously look at, as a council, as city policy, how we engage in that and make sure that those corporations or investment firms do not take completely over our neighborhoods. Now, you know, some of the things I would like to do probably would not be supported by everyone, but I think it's that same skin in the game that I've been talking about as the city has, or being able to either co-develop or acquire properties, or encourage land trust, community trust, for folks to be able to maintain those properties. We are attempting a couple of those experiments as we move with our affordable housing plan, which I mentioned earlier, was making sure that the properties that the city currently owns, that those are turned into affordable housing. And so it's beyond that, what other skin in the game can we put as a city to make sure that those are available?
How will you oversee the light rail that will be coming down Central to Baseline to protect the community, and in quotations they have youth, against arresting, ticketing, fines, not paying fees, basically the petty issues that they usually have with those on the light rail, but particularly our youth?
I mean, one of the things we were able to do through the pandemic with the funds that came in is we actually provided, people may not notice, but we provided free transportation for over a year. And, you know, the world didn't end. We were really afraid of it. I do think there's an ability to either talk to youth or either certain segments of the population or overall reach a point where public transportation should be free. It's happened in other places. I think it would reduce that, right? Because it's sometimes not only Phoenix Police, but other agencies that are controlling and giving the tickets. And so I do think looking for ways to do that and not penalize people who are trying to get to work, trying to get to school is something we can do.
Okay, what can we do to change or reverse? Okay. I think this question is more so about what you can do and what we can do as a community, but more so using your voice, right? Because we know you're at the city and not the state. But what can we do to change or reverse the AZ state law passed last year that took away investigative power from the Office of Accountability, Transparency, to investigate Phoenix Police use of force, assaults, and killings?
I think it's moving forward with what we have. I think with even some folks in the room, what we got done with Hope, again, might not have been enough. But it was actually one of the only policies in the entire country that allowed non-police to be inside an investigation room. It would have been the only investigative body that included non-police inside these interviews. Again, that might not be enough for certain folks. We have an opportunity now with a new AG to be able to challenge things. similar, with the ordinance that's gonna be voted on next week, you're gonna hear some of the folks that may not want to vote on it, and this is the income source discrimination, is that the previous AG pushed back and said that that policy wasn't lawful. And so next week, the first time, the city's actually gonna vote for something that someone else has decided wasn't lawful. I think there's a new opportunity now for the city to stand up to the state, and the cities that are led by Democrats or more progressive, whether it's Tucson or Phoenix, have the opportunity to challenge the state in a different way. And so that's one way where cities can take more risk. I think the other way is obviously lobbying and supporting folks and figuring out how to change things up state.
You already voted yes on, who's thing, for banning income source discrimination?
Yes, and myself, along with two folks that walked in late, and folks, want to approach them, have conversations with them on who they wanted to sneak in.
They're also gonna vote yes?
Yeah, Councilwoman Laura Pastor and Betty Guardado were in the back. The three of us actually signed the letter to put it on the agenda to make sure we have a
All right. There's a severe lack of representation for Black residents. The failure of representation is manifested in the growing numbers of Black senior citizens that have been displaced and are in jeopardy of eviction. What forms of outreach are you doing to accommodate these needs?
First of all, it's probably not sufficient. The district has 220, not as an excuse, but just as a reality. The district has 220,000 people, and each one of our offices has three staff and some intern. And so we have not been able to do enough. And so what we've asked, or the way we've tried to be more helpful, is to have conversation with organizations or already organized spaces to help us with that. And not to help us do it, but to make sure that we are taking care of issues or areas that we might not be seeing. Having said that, we try to do community resource fairs. We try to go and have open office hours in different parts of the district. And again, I think there's only so much we can do to get out to folks. I think the commitment continues to be, especially now, post-pandemic, to try to host more of those events and try to go to people and not expect people to come to City Hall or know a number to call. And so I think there's still work to be done in that, and we're both open to suggestions or support, making sure that we're reaching out to the folks that need us.
Okay. There were two questions, so I'm gonna combine these two questions, since one is specifically about the housing. And the other one will be more of a local elected official effort on this particular subject as well, so I'm gonna combine those two questions. What would you do to expand reentry housing? And also, what would you do to expand reentry programs on a local level? There are a lot of ways this can be done, right? Not just at a state level. So if you can give us those two answers.
So it's not done now by the city. And some can argue that it's insufficient by the county and the state as well, whatever program they may have. I do think, we mentioned some of those empty buildings that exist out there. This last year, we were able to use one for a shelter. I think we can look in the same way to partner or make sure that housing that's built is designated for folks. I do think there's obviously a need and there's a role that the city can play. I think it's come down to resources that have not been allocated to that, and the city has never taken responsibility. And I think with your comment, you said it, I think most of city folks expect the state or the county to pick that up. And I think like other things, whether it's, shelters or other issues we've seen, if we're seeing that there's a gap that the state and county aren't picking it up, like this one, we should try to pick it up ourselves. And so that's definitely a conversation. That's something we have not done, and I myself have not done, even though I've worked with folks in that area. But that's definitely something, a conversation that we can have moving forward.
I think one thing I'd like to add was, we've mentioned having a root cause analysis. This concept may be new to some folks in the audience, maybe not to you, but the idea of soft policing, where we look at treatment programs that are often mandated. We see folks with certain contracts that are making money off of transitional housing, and COs that are predatory, housing that is predatory. How do we also make sure that we are connecting with folks that are rooted in care that addresses a root cause, but also allows space for voluntary programs. So if somebody just needs housing, and they don't want to be put into or forced into some type of program that might not be appropriate for them, how do we hold folks accountable to things like that?
I don't think that's a city-only issue, but I agree with it. I think a couple of things are happening in the city and the state that, politics might not be changing fast enough for some of us, including myself. But I do think there's, like the $8 million that we put out in mental health support, the city had never done it before. One of the ideas behind that was that it actually showed that the capacity wasn't there. And that hopefully that $8 million allowed either existing organizations or folks entering the space to grow. But because there's so much scarcity on that, I don't want to call it a luxury. We haven't had the ability to I don't want to call it judgment either, but to basically, we haven't had the ability to assess who's doing it in the right way. And we also, because we have a brand new public health office who's asserting some of the things that the city's going to be working on in that arena, at a very new place, where I think that conversation is important as we start engaging. I think what the council's done in the past, for example, with CBI, and I think CBI has its critique, CBI has done good things, is we funded certain programs, even though it happened before me or even when I'm there, we fund certain things and then hope it goes away. Because we constantly function as a reactionary body. And so people come complain to council, we try to find a quick fix, like, hey, CBI, here you go, fix this. But I think it's getting away from that, being more intentional, having a public health plan, and having a plan of both being able to sustain and maintain programs like what we just did last year.
Thank you for that, and I think that is very important because we often do see those same, let's just give it to CBI, let's talk to Phoenix Rescue Mission and have them do something that's completely inappropriate for what they're capable of doing. If you're in here, no offense, but also offense. So I wrote that pause for applause in here. The city has been more and more involved with blue zones, which if folks are not familiar with blue zones, there's also a book about blue zones, which is about how to live a happy, long, healthy life. It is a study by white men on other very privileged white men, how they were able to live long, prosperous lives, and Blue Zones Project uses this model to assess neighborhoods like South Phoenix. So we see a disconnect right there, and this is something new. Like Blue Zones, they've been at, they're at the Legion on Monday talking about it, or Tuesday, Monday. How can we, moving forward, you say, we want to be talking to the right folks. See what Bali is in the building, once again, Fund for Empowerment right behind me. But how do we ensure that we're not falling into those same traps, getting complacent, falling back into those old things, especially because you're saying that we don't want to do that, but the city is actively trying to push blue zones. when we're saying that is not what we need. We need community-centered care, root causes being addressed, not wine night, which is something that is listed in the Blue Zones book as how to improve your life. Make sure you have wine nights. So how do we ensure that we're not falling into those same very white traps?
White savior traps.
White savior traps.
I think we've been critical of the program from its inception in making sure that they're connecting with folks. I think there's obviously some folks in the room signed a letter that we support in the criticism and making sure that, you know, the folks that are already been doing the work, like it's easy to, like, it's not common knowledge, it's common knowledge to us that South Phoenix has a life expectancy of 10 to 14 years less, right? They find that out, and they do a study of where people live 100 years, and they're like, let's apply those things here. That obviously is not how things should function, or how we should accept those things from happening. But at the same time, there's a reality that we live 10 to 14 years less. And so what does it mean for us, us I'm talking about as a resident and also as a city council person who represents folks, to be able to serve what culturally competent care looks like. And those things that are prescribed there, which is community, we're seeing it tonight, healthy food, exercise, are things that both Black and Indigenous communities have always known. We just have never had the ability or the self-determination to apply them because we are either being exploited or having to do the things that we've had to deal with. And so I do think that ancestral knowledge is here, and when a program like that comes, it may be good to bring attention, but I think it's important for all of us to stand to it and say, hey, there is, those solutions are here, and some of the work we just talked about are already doing that work. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We got about a little bit close to about 12 minutes to get through these next questions. And so, moving along to, there's been a growing narrative between the questions that's been asked by the community, and some of it seems like it's common knowledge, some of it isn't, right? So all folks don't know where to go, so this question speaks to that. What can you do to better educate the folks in District 8 as to the resources and the accesses to the city institutions, beyond just websites or phone numbers and so on and so forth?
We have issue in every department when it comes to community engagement. So every department in regular services department, every single streets, every single department struggles with being able to engage right with the community. Our main role as council members is to vote on and decide what the $1.8 billion we spend on every year. Last year, and some organizations did mobilize, but out of the 1.6 million people that live in this city, we had 400 people actually come to the forums and tell the city where to spend the money. And again, I'm not putting it just on folks, but that's the level of community input we're getting. So last year, our office, we attempted to host our own meetings, and so we had our meeting that we hosted with some our folks at the Audubon, and we try to have different meetings that not only allow people to tell us where they think those funds should go, but also share information the other way around, where we can share, hey, this is how the budget process works. And we've seen some communities actually take advantage of this in a way where obviously they're maybe more privileged, but you saw, for example, last year, a community out in the league where the city had been sitting on resources for 16 years. They've gone on every single one of our budget meetings, and now a new park is going to the league. Obviously, we push for it, and it's happening. But I think it's...
Is this park going to have benches? Because the bus stops were removed in Levine on 51st Ave, so poor people couldn't sit down anymore. So how friendly is this park going to be? Because the area you're talking about right now is an area that's been neglected. And a big part is probably the way that the district is cut. That area is yours, but all the areas around it is E7. So we do see neglect there. And that's an area that we talked about earlier. These aren't even unsheltered folks. These are residents who live in the area in homes that are also being, seeing this unwelcome from the city and the community at large.
Yeah, so the park's in the design process right now. I hope it has benches, but I do think that conversation and your comment needs to also not just be heard by everyone, but we need to make sure that folks understand that folks are disappointed as well. Because similar to the 400 people that call for the budget meetings, you have 100 people maybe calling that other council office or staff that those budgets should be using.
Okay, thank you. This question is going to go directly about the youth. And not only you, the others in the room, I want y'all to hear this out. How will you help reduce teen killing by the Phoenix Police Department? Help mental health within the youth and reduce incarceration within the youth.
There's a lot of things there, but I think one of the things that we did in 2009 is completely fund all the teen programs. Again, I'm speaking directly to, City of Phoenix can do. In the late 90s and early 2000s, we created a community center basically outside of every high school. In South had one. In 2009, all those after-school programs, all that youth work, whether it was, job placement or support, was actually cut, was completely defunded. I think we need to bring that back. I do think we need to think more about youth councils, hearing youth voices. One of the things we talked about with the community center that's outside the South, we just reopened and made some investments to it. You're probably familiar with it, where you went, where we want to have a youth budget hearing. And so it's the youth that, one, get to see where the money's spent, but also give suggestions of where that's going to be spent. I have a 16-year-old. I have a 16-year-old that, is in his friends. Again, growing up on 16th Street in Southern, I see the situation they're in, and I think they have a lot of those answers, and I think a lot of times we tend to think we know what they need, but I think it's actually including them in the process of what they need right now. The pandemic was no joke for that generation that's coming up. They've already had 2 years of trauma that we all need to support with, whether they were missing school, online school, whatever their situation was, lost some friends, lost family members. And so I do think this generation, speaking from dealing with my son, needs some extra love.
I want you to really follow through. That was my question. I just don't want to hear you say it. I want you to show us.
So please take heed. Next question. What are the biggest barriers you have experienced in advancing an abolitionist platform as a council person? How do you plan to move beyond these barriers if elected into your second term? This other part. Any lessons learned from the previous term?
Deep questions. By acknowledging and running for this office, abolitionists training with thoughts, or not thoughts, but feelings, values. I'm not saying there's a contradiction in that, right? By accepting this position, and accepting to be part of the state, and accepting to be part of a system that I criticize and I now sit up here and I'm the council member for the city of Phoenix, which also represents those that are causing harm. And so, first of all, acknowledging that's where I'm at. You've gone through that process of what it feels like to go in there. And so it's the constant question of harm reduction with an argument, or making sure you're still making the argument of why things shouldn't be the way they are, right? Both by being able to describe how we got here, which we've seen the videos of colonization and slavery, but at the same time, wanting to reduce harm, or needing to reduce harm while studying the system. And so I would say some of the things we've done is try to present different lenses within the system. Meaning, when I first went in, and this goes to lessons, I wanted to talk about social determinants of health. I was speaking a totally different language than the folks both in staff or the council. And so we needed to start a public health office, right? We needed one of the 15,000 people in the city to be a public health expert, to be able to translate that to everybody and be able to hold that accountable. Places like the city of country didn't have a public health. We didn't have an equity department. We've now established that and still haven't been able to hire. And so very simple, and I'm trying to answer this in 2 minutes, but very things that may be simple or common sense to folks do not make common sense in a system that's been established to do and commit the violence that it has. And so therefore, I think being able to bring that information that I learned and try as much as I can to have the institution have different lenses of race, class, gender that are completely absent while they're making decisions. And that's why, with that question, I feel like the contradictions are just, they're intense, right? And I still would encourage folks in the room to run for office. I still wouldn't, even though it's been really hard and it's been complicated with lots of lessons, I still think there's lessons learned and there's a need for us to not concede those positions and have others have said concede to that oppression that these positions of power are created.
Okay, I got a follow-up question for that. As you moved along in this system that you know that wasn't designed for us, if you are elected to a second term, how do you push forward more on the abolitionist principles and the values that you know around moving way of Black liberation, rather than stay central to what you've seen since you've been there?
It's that balance of, there's times where there's votes that it's 1 to 8, and you need to accept that. There's certain votes that are going to happen where I'm the only one that's going to vote against it. And there's other times where a policy, like anti-discrimination ordinance that's going to happen next week, where there's a possibility to get 5 votes. And so it's how do you maintain that? How are you able to hold and take certain votes or take certain stands or expose certain things to the city that show something that may not be possible now, but could be possible in the future. And then it's also the harm reduction piece of like, hey, there's actually a policy we can get done. And so that balance is not easy, and it's something I'm learning, right? It's something where it's like I literally went from being the sharp critic or the person that was able to be righteous to someone that's having had that balance of the time where I'm gonna also be able to be like, nah, this is my value, and I'm even if the other 8 people vote yes, I'm sticking to it, and the time where this change or this policy is gonna be enough to reduce and harm and still be able to lead us in a way where folks might want to go. And again, I'm assuming we want to go in the same places, but hearing the values, understanding the values, there's common values shared from myself and the folks that I know, my political families. And so I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but it's what I can think of now, and it's striking that balance. And also, knowing that it doesn't have to be me, and it's not always gonna be me. And if I can take it so far, there's gonna be someone, right, I wasn't the first, I'm not gonna be the last. Like, I can take it so far and create enough space for the next person that has more imagination, more ability than me to come in, then I think that's also okay, to just be in that place.
Okay. Thank you for that. That will conclude our questions, but before we get to our closing, we have a call to action that we want to continue to inform folks about. I want Matt to talk a little bit more again about the politics of play Saturday. Give y'all that information. We also have our slide on our QR code as well as the information. So Matt's going to tell you about that, and then we're going to close out the last little boy.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, once again, this Saturday, February 25th, from 2 to 4 p.m., we're going to be at Campo Santo Mexicano at the Sotelo Cemetery over near 12th Street and Broadway. We'll be talking about the displacement report that Mass Live and many community partners and community members have been working on for a few years, identifying and unpacking the 4 drivers of displacement. It'll be a day of food, storytelling, music. It says drinks up there. It's probably like sweet tea. But please join us. It's really important that we continue to have these conversations around things like gentrification, because often people that are the ones that have seen these patterns of displacement are left out of these conversations. Or maybe to feel that they don't have the language to talk about it, and we don't believe that. We believe that the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So please join us Saturday, 2 to 4 p.m. At the Sotelo Cemetery.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing this space to happen, because this space could not happen without community. So thank you for showing up. If you were here at the beginning, you heard us talk about Dare to Dream. As you've seen the platform, as you've read through the platform, as you've asked your questions, as you've heard some answers, we revisit our Dare to Dream. Dare to dream of a world where we don't have to operate within this system that kills and cages us. Dare to dream of a community where freedom and Black liberation isn't a figment of our imagination or a failed promise from a system built on white supremacy. Dare to dream of a community where we address harm with care and not cops. Where we invest in community and not legalize slavery in this carceral system. Dare to dream of a world where the infant mortality rate for our Black community is not 3 to 4 times that of their white counterparts, and that there is adequate health care for physical and mental health in our communities. Dare to dream of a platform that will truly shift power back into our community and away from those who abuse it each and every day. Dream of a world where our unhoused receive the community care and the resources to feel and be made whole. Dare to dream of reparations as an actual attainable demand and not some far-fetched idea. Dare to dream of a community where we aren't displaced, where gentrification is no more, and where community benefits agreements are as regular and consistent as the system's use of the word stakeholders and diversity and inclusion. Dream of a community where those who are directly impacted are the leaders, the change agents, the voices, the problem solvers, and the healers. Because we know those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Abolition isn't a bad word. Abolition is our dare to dream. So as we move along, push back, Push back when people say we gotta accept these systems. Because my grandma said 0 plus 0 is 0. Push back when folks try to make us adhere to these oppressive systems when we know they weren't built for us. And we know the foundation that they were built on. So as we close, I need everybody who truly believes it. If you don't believe it, don't repeat after me. But if you truly believe it, I need you to repeat after me. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Now say it like you mean it. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Now say,
Thank you, everybody. We're going to send the platform to Carlos. I know you've already seen it, but thank you for engaging with the platform. We're going to send it to Carlos. So, I mean, this is going to be ongoing. We're going to be constantly being like, hey, you're demand, you know how it works. But yeah, Power Network doesn't concede without demand, folks. So thank you. And Bruce, was there anything else?
Good night. Make sure to follow us on all of our social medias. Make sure that you're tagging Keisha Hodge Washington with your questions as well. Have a good night, folks.
Eat the food, grab the food, grab the
Sandwich, grab some fruit, all that. Grab a plate for your neighbor. Grab a plate for yourself.